Hey guys, my name is Jason Schuster. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I own Intricate Art Spine and Body Solutions. It's a continuing education company teaching other doctors how to do a couple things. Sirtuin genes, sirtuins, telomeres, telomerase, and the mTOR pathways. So there's mTOR complex 1 and 2. Sirtuin genes are one of my favorite. I think they're really, really cool. This is something that David Sinclair has made popular. It's one of the reasons why NMN supplementation and NR supplementation, nicotinamide riboside and nicotinamide mononucleotide supplementation, which both lead to elevated levels of NAD+ in the cell. So remember, NAD+ that gets converted to NADH, and the electron that gets popped off of NAD+ is what the mitochondria themselves use for energy to create ATPs, right? So if we don't have enough NAD+, not enough of it can get converted into NADH. We don't have enough electron energy, and the mitochondria dysfunction, we don't produce enough ATPs. We go into energy deficiency, and then things like autoimmunity, cancer, idiopathic disease, all of those things happen. Sirtuins, which we're going to talk about right now, sirtuins are NAD+ dependent histone deacetylases that regulate numerous signaling pathways in the cells, you guys. So there's 7 sirtuin genes, right? The ones, at least so far, that seem to be the most potent as far as improving health span and lifespan of cells, which improves our health span and lifespan, is Sirtuin 1 and Sirtuin 6. Now they're finding more and more about the other ones, and there's mitochondrial sirtuins that are mostly in mitochondria. There's non-mitochondrial sirtuins, and they can change and mix and match, and we're going to go through these here in a second. But overall, if you just want to keep one thing in mind, the 7 sirtuin genes, when they get turned on, lead to health and homeostasis of cells. That's an easy way to think about it. You want your sirtuin genes turned on because they lead to health and homeostasis through numerous different mechanisms, by positively affecting the mitochondria, giving the mitochondria more electrons to use, improving the amount of NAD+ in the cell, right? They help with inflammation, they help with a ton of other things, and we're going to get into those, but they're very, very important. So in general, having a more turned on set of sirtuin genes produces more sirtuin proteins, and those sirtuin proteins are typically helpful, and they do more helpful stuff. Right now, obviously, just like with anything else, with water, if you have too much of anything in the body, it's going to kill you. In general, human beings, our systems are not expressing sirtuin genes and not producing sirtuin proteins at nearly high enough capacity to produce optimal health. So basically, everybody could use these genes turned on a little bit more. It just seems to make us healthier. Again, exactly how all this stuff is working, we don't know. We have some ideas, and we think, it seems like we know a lot. Like when I go through all this stuff, you guys, it seems like we know a lot about this stuff, but we really, really know very little. We're just scratching the surface. So just keep that in mind. This is the most up-to-date medical literature, peer-reviewed literature out there. But this is all based off most up-to-date references. All the references are in here. But again, just remember that we don't know very much about this stuff, right? So we have found specific activators, or things that seem to specifically turn on this suite of sirtuin genes more than other stuff as far as supplements and eating food and things like that goes. So like I mentioned, 3 of the most potent ways to elevate the activity of sirtuins and increase sirtuin genes is with the supplements nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN, nicotinamide riboside, NR, and peptide supplementation like epithalin, MOTS, and MOTC, right? MOTC is a mitochondrial peptide, epithalin is a mitochondrial peptide. They both have really, really potent healing capacity, and more or less they improve the mitochondrial's ability to efficiently produce ATP, and the mitochondria work better, and everything else in the cell works better. We'll get into that in depth in the peptide therapy class with a bunch of other peptides, but that's just for quick reference. So epithalin and MOTC are mitochondrial peptides. As far as supplements go, NMN and NR, nicotinamide mononucleotide and nicotinamide riboside, are really good for them. And then the mitochondrial sirtuins, you guys. So there's mitochondrial sirtuins, and there's nuclear sirtuins, and then there's a cytoplasmic sirtuin, right? So mitochondrial sirtuins are the mitochondrial sirtuins are Sirt 3, 4, and 5. These ones are not nearly as heavily spoken about in the literature, because we haven't found things yet that specifically activate these sirtuins, right? Like I said, NMN and NR specifically activate SIRT1 and SIRT6. Some of the mitochondrial peptides do activate SIRT3, 4, and 5, but not in a seriously major way. So as far as regular supplements go, we haven't found anything specifically for the mitochondrial sirtuins. There are some peptide therapies, and I guess you could consider those supplements. Some of the peptide therapies act on the mitochondrial ones, but the ones that are talking about in literature the most are SIRT1 and SIRT6, right? So sirtuins regulate inflammation, metabolism, oxidative stress, apoptosis or programmed cell death. They generally improve health span and lifespan of the cells, and they work in many different ways. So sirtuins act on telomerase, telomerase acts on sirtuins. So again, you can't just have one thing in and of itself and study it. You have to study things in the human body in relation to what everything else is going on, because everything reacts to everything else in some way. And the fact of the matter is we just don't understand most of the ways in which communication happens between cells in our body. Cells themselves seem to know what to do, but there's technically no instructions that tell the cells what to do. There's instructions for our body to produce proteins that form into cells, and then the cells do stuff, but we don't understand like what is telling the cells to do that stuff, right? That is a big mystery in biology right now, you guys. It's not the DNA. As far as we understand, the DNA doesn't tell the cells like, okay, it doesn't tell mitochondria, you produce ATP. Certain genes produce certain proteins, and those proteins, when they get in certain concentrations with each other and in relation to other proteins, they form into complexes like the mitochondria and the cytoplasm and all this stuff, and then that stuff ends up doing other stuff, but we don't understand like how. It seems like it just knows how to do this stuff without any specific instruction. There's instructions to make proteins, but there's no specific instructions for what those proteins should do. They do stuff based on everything else around them, which is basically what epigenetics is. David Sinclair, you guys, I have his podcast listed here. That's a really, really good one. It's only 8 episodes, but he talks about NMN, NR, resveratrol, longevity genes. It's a really, really good one. He does that one with a medical journalist. So David he's a very, very smart dude. I think it's a little bit difficult for him sometimes to speak to non-scientific people, and the medical journalist that he does this podcast with is really good about just kind of slowing him down and asking him questions. It makes it more understandable for non-medical people, right? So that's a great podcast. Just like with DNA and vitamins, things like sirtuins can be acetylated, they can be methylated, all sorts of stuff can change, right? So NAD plus is a very, very important component for sirtuin activity, right? So NAD plus is one of the most important things in the human body. There's NAD plus in every cell in the human body, you guys. So the way that cyanide kills you is it blocks the NAD plus pathways in the cells, and the mitochondria immediately run out of, our body immediately runs out of ATP. So I figure that something that does the opposite of cyanide, which is instant death, the opposite of instant death must be good for you, right? So sirtuins are more or less like the opposite of cyanide, and I think of NAD plus that way too. Cyanide blocks NAD plus gives the cell more energy, right? So cyanide death, opposite of instant death, should be pretty good. So very, very helpful to have excessive amount or elevated levels of NAD plus in our cells, and that's one of the things that turns on Sirtuin genes and just in general makes the genes healthier. And it's why supplementing and properly eating and exercising is so important, because all of that stuff improves NAD plus levels in the cell as well. And we go over how specifically to do all that stuff in our other classes, in the nutrition and supplementation, 2 parts of that class, in our peptide therapy class. In the intro class is a great class. That's a really cheap one, you guys. The intro class is only $69, 5 CEUs. It's got a ton of valuable information in there for you guys. Here's some more specific information on the sirtuins. So mammals mostly have 3 nuclear sirtuins, right? 1, 6, and 7. 1 cytosolic sirtuin, SIRT2, and then 3 mitochondrial sirtuins, SIRT3, 4, and 5. So SIRT1, 6, and 7, the nuclear ones, more or less, they regulate DNA homeostasis, right? So, like we've mentioned in this class, the DNA is what the DNA is. The underlying code for the DNA doesn't usually get changed. What happens is that code gets read in different ways based on molecules that get stuck to the outside of the double helix of the DNA, and those would be like the epigenetic marks or the epigenetic tags, like phosphorylation, methylation, right, acetylation, deamination, all that stuff. SIRT2 regulates cell cycle depression. SIRT3, the mitochondrial sirtuin, regulates a wide range of targets from metabolic mitochondrial enzymes. It's been implicated in a bunch of nutritional deficiency problems insofar as when you have nutritional deficiencies, SIRT3 doesn't get turned on enough and you end up having health problems. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And one of the things, you guys, and this is important to remember, one of the things that mimics the effects of exercise and that turns on all of these sirtuin genes and it helps improve mitochondrial peptides and improve autonomic homeostasis in general, one of the things that does that is caloric restriction, or not eating too much food, right? The human body, over the course of evolution, we were going through periods of hunger and starvation and then bountiful food, and that was just the general progression of the year for most of human history, right? Only really in the last 100 or 200 years, out of our hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, have humans been much more stable as far as the amount of food that we have, and our body is not built to be full on food all the time. Dressing the body and the cells in certain amounts in proper ways, like the idea of hormesis, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, more or less. If you stress the cells just enough but not too much, it makes them stronger and it makes them function better. That's what caloric restriction does, is it mimics that cellular stress that causes things like the mTOR pathways, the AMPK pathways, sirtuins. It improves the activity of all of those. Protein-rich diets, again, caloric restriction, just eating good food and properly stressing your cells is one of the easiest ways to elevate the levels of the Sirtuin genes and NAD+ in the cells, along with taking supplements like nicotinamide mononucleotide and nicotinamide riboside, which we talk about in the supplement and nutrition class and vitamin class. Activation of SIRT3 and SIRT5 are being looked into for things like cancer treatment, heart failure, right? Activation of SIRT3 has been shown to reverse cardiomyopathy in mice, right? Or cardiac hypertrophy in mice, reduce beta amyloid in vitro, which is one of the Parkinson's and Alzheimer's peptides that you see misfolded in the brain. And it has really, really positive effects on mice with Alzheimer's disease. And Sirtuin genes have been relatively well studied in humans also, you guys. So Sirtuin genes are very, very anti-cancerous, pro-homeostatic, anti-disease, pro-health, right? That's the best way to think about it. And eating well and dieting in a certain way and supplementing in a certain way, right, in an objective, thoughtful manner will help elevate the levels of these Sirtuin genes. And again, in this class, we're just going over what this stuff is and kind of how it works. In the other classes, like the nutrition supplementation class and the peptide class, we're going to go over specifically what you can take and put into your body to elevate these things.